Out of every struggle known to the human species, there is none as prevalent as a person's struggle to conceptualize their own body image and feel comfortable in their own skin. Though vices surrounding foreign substances like drugs and alcohol are more widely discussed, almost everyone has some sort of issue with their body in their life, which then led to a less than healthy response. Conversations around body image issues have become more prevalent in the last 20 years. However, discussions about them are still uncomfortable for most, while others outright refuse to have them. In the modern day, the average person faces an onslaught of images telling us exactly how we should look. Advertisements, television, and movies all show us the best of the best, the most attractive and most desirable people on earth, and they dictate how we should look. They show us what skincare we should use if we want to look like Emma Chamberlain or Jennifer Aniston. They show us the workout routine Chris Evans did for his role in Captain America, and promise us that if we pay $500 a year, we too can get his results. And they show us what makeup palette was used on the set of Euphoria to give all the actors and actresses clear, dewy skin, promising us that we will look just as good if we buy it. The veritable deluge of images tell us that certain hair colors, body types, and makeup looks are found to be more attractive than others and push us to buy more products, work out more or less, and consider plastic surgery in order to meet the standards that the agencies are upholding. In the modern day, we can see the extreme shift in social media alone. In 2016, makeup bloggers would teach their followers how to do a full face of full coverage makeup, using products meant for professional filming and special effects, namely because the more makeup they used on their faces, the more they can make monetarily through affiliate links. Now they focus on more natural, subtle looks, touting the benefits of skincare over everything else. While cognitively, we know that the advertising industries are working with the fast food, weight loss, plastic surgery, and cosmetics industries, so we continue to buy their products without thought. But we still fall into their traps, thinking that if we just buy the latest weight loss pill or eat nothing but McDonald's new zero-calorie snack, we will be just like the smiling, happy people we see in their ads. We see it constantly, as every 10 years or so, the standard of beauty changes, and the ideal body weight, size, and look shifts radically, making it so that people who were previously seen as the ideal body type are pushed out, and therefore have to partake in aggressive weight loss, weight gain, or plastic surgery to continue to be seen as such. Conversations around body image, self-actualization, and how we as a society deal with them are becoming more normal as time goes on. But most of the conversation focuses on women, as it is still seen as taboo for men to admit to dealing with disordered eating or body image issues. For many men, strict dieting, doing excessive gym and fitness routines to the point of physical and mental exhaustion, and even taking steroids are simply seen as what is necessary to fit the ideal body type, and refuse to acknowledge any negative results, no matter how terrible. And that is certainly the case today. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, brought to you by our Patreon. Today we are going to be covering the case of Chris Benoit, a professional wrestler who would go on to do the unthinkable to his family. This video was suggested by multiple of our subscribers, as well as our patrons over on Patreon. If there is a case you would be interested in seeing me cover, let me know in the comments down below, or send an email to dreading.official@gmail.com. This video is copyright struck by a third party, meaning that all the ads on this video go directly to that party. I wanted to make that clear before we begin, and I cannot control the amount of ads that are on this video, given the usage of footage from the WWE, a CNN documentary, and more. With all of that out of the way, let us begin. Chris was born in Montreal, Quebec, to Michael and Margaret Benoit. He had a singular sister, Lori, and all around, the family lived an incredibly quiet and unextraordinary life. That is, until Chris discovered wrestling. According to his childhood friends and classmates, Chris was an extremely shy and emotional kid. He was sensitive in a way that others would idly mock, and he was extremely caring to those around him. However, that kindness and sensitivity often led him to being the butt of many jokes, so he did his best to suppress it, wanting to fit in. So when Chris was introduced to pro wrestling, he decided that that was the career path he wanted to take. Chris idolized the pro wrestling scene. He saw the men as being above all others, strong, resilient, and always ready to defend what they thought was right. They were bigger than everyone around them, and Chris often referred to them as superheroes, and he wanted more than anything to be just like them. He began to fixate on wrestling, talking about the overly produced fights whenever he could, and begging his parents to take him to wrestling events. When he was just 12 years old, he would attend a local wrestling event featuring Tom Dynamite Kid Billington and Bret Hart. He would go on to describe this event in immense detail throughout his life, stating that this event is what inspired him to dedicate himself to the art of professional wrestling. The two wrestlers stood out above everyone else, and the way they both commanded respect and attention from the people around them entranced Chris. He referred to them as idols and became determined to follow in their footsteps. From that point on, Chris would begin training, which would also begin his war on his body. Those who were around Chris from this point on would talk highly of his dedication to the sport and his willingness to do whatever would put him a cut above his peers. He won numerous awards throughout his high school due to the dedication to both bodybuilding and wrestling, and his extreme focus was something many people emphasized. If he was told to do 100 push-ups, he would do 200. If he was told to eat nothing but protein for 10 weeks, he would do it without question. And if someone told him that he could get an edge on the competition by bashing his head through a wall, he would do that too. For Chris, pain didn't matter, as it would be worth it just to obtain his goal. His drive to being the best knew no limits, and he was willing to take the punches both literally and figuratively. He had watched wrestlers do daring stunts, hit each other in the back of the head with chairs, and throw their bodies down with incredible force, so pain was just a small burden to bear for the dream. As he began to train, he would talk to other fighters and would be annoyed at how many didn't have what it took to be a professional. Anytime someone would talk about how squeamish they were about getting hit, how they didn't want to damage their bodies, Chris would look down at them and told them they would never make it in the field. Because of Chris's intense dedication and work ethic, he stood out amongst his peers and eventually got the opportunity to train with his idol, Bret Hart. The Hart family operated a gym in the basement of their home, which they referred to as the dungeon. It was there that Chris would learn everything he knew about pro wrestling. He would be told the tips and tricks of the trade, and began to adopt some of his idol's own signature moves, like the sharpshooter and the flying headbutt. Again, these moves would take a toll on his body, specifically his head, but Chris would pay no mind to the injuries. In fact, he would encourage them, as he was always willing to go farther than any of the other wrestlers. Chris would often boast about how well he could handle hits to his head, and would go so far as to state that he had no problem being hit by a metal chair in the ring. Though Chris was taught by Stu and other professional wrestlers how to properly take hits and do moves like the flying headbutt with minimal injury, he was still deliberately putting his head through an immense amount of physical trauma, the likes of which would take a radical toll on his life. While it's common knowledge today, for a number of years, the majority of people were not aware of the link between repeated hits to the head and rapid brain degeneration. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or as it is more commonly known as CTE, was first observed by Dr. Harrison Martland in professional boxers. Harrison noted that boxers appeared to lack certain cognitive functions after a fight, and those functions would take a long time to return. Older boxers likewise seemed to lose certain cognitive abilities as they aged, as many exhibited similar symptoms. Young men who participated in the sport would lose their memories and have difficulties in social environments where they used to thrive. Dr. Martland thus posited that it was possible that the repeated strikes to the head might be the cause of irreversible damage to the brain, and that it could likewise cause them to lose certain brain function entirely. Increased study into what Martland labeled punch-drunk syndrome would show that men and women who participated in contact-heavy sports or were struck repeatedly in the head throughout their lives would go on to experience a litany of similar symptoms. These symptoms would often materialize within a decade, long after the blows to the head in their daily lives had stopped. Symptoms of early-stage CTE would include confusion, disorientation, dizziness, and headaches. In most cases, these symptoms would be overlooked or misdiagnosed, as they could be attributed to something as little as not drinking enough water or standing too fast. However, they would then escalate to memory loss, social instability, impulsive behavior, and poor judgment. In most cases of CTE that have been observed, doctors have described their patients forgetting where they are, feeling lost and isolated, and lashing out towards those around them in fear. Everything around them feels scary and dangerous, leading to them potentially hurting their loved ones in a confused bout of self-preservation or fear. This can also lead to incredibly impulsive behavior, especially in terms of spending. Many former athletes who have dealt with CTE have had people deliberately take advantage of them in their confusion, usually taking their savings as their own and manipulating them into bad decision making. In the final stages of CTE, the patients are slated to deal with dementia, movement disorders, hypomimia, speech impediments, sensory processing disorder, tremors, vertigo, deafness, depression, and suicidality. Many patients suffering from CTE go into a deep depression, often remembering their years of athleticism with contempt and anger, as they spent the entirety of their life at the peak of physical health, only to feel as if they are being let down by their bodies. Their brain degeneration leads to them feeling useless and dependent upon others, something that they grow to resent. Though the link had been established when Chris was beginning his career, many people considered the science to be meaningless and thought that the risk was worth the rewards. While we have no way of knowing what Chris thought about the connection between his aggressive fighting style and repeated head injuries, every time he would step into the ring, do a flying headbutt, or request that he be hit in the head with a metal chair, he was putting his brain through incredible trauma that would inevitably lead to tragedy. As he continued to train, Chris would also begin to abuse steroids, so he could constantly be at peak performance. He was dedicated to being the best, in and out of the ring, and he was told by his peers and his doctors that using steroids would give him a competitive edge. According to former professional wrestler Hulk Hogan, using steroids was so normalized in the professional wrestling world that everyone was using them, and that, quote, they were safer than sugar for an athlete's body. And to those who used them, steroids were worth the risk. Anabolic steroids would result in massive muscle growth, making those taking them appear to be almost superhuman. Former wrestler Lex Luger would open up about how most wrestlers were expected to take steroids, as Vince McMahon would expect them to act like a superhero when they were in the ring. Steroids also reduce muscle damage that occurs during workouts, helping athletes recover quickly and enabling them to work out more. Many professional athletes have abused steroids to achieve peak performance in their dedicated field, and in most professional sports, it's less about natural ability as it is about who can cheat the system more. However, despite them being normalized in most athletic arenas, there are a plethora of downsides to using steroids. Men usually develop prominent breasts, shrunken testicles, enlarged prostates, and experience increased rates of baldness and infertility. Moreover, physically, they can experience high blood pressure, heart and blood circulation problems, kidney problems or failure, liver damage, and tumors. The toll steroids take on the human body are not simply limited to physical, as many men and women who have abused them develop what is known as roid rage. Roid rage has been characterized as extreme aggression and irritability, often to an unreasonable extent. It's not uncommon for those who use steroids to lash out at those closest to them, even going so far as to physically assault friends and family because of a paranoid delusion caused by the steroids. Many former steroid users have recalled being overwhelmingly paranoid and feeling as if they were acting in self-preservation, only to later realize that they had assaulted someone without cause or reason. Chris, in his desire to become a professional wrestler, would abuse steroids in order to be in the top of his field, and when he was on them, he would change immediately. His personal relationships would suffer, namely because Chris would change from a loving, warm person to a paranoid and manic person obsessed with being the best. He would lash out, sometimes violently, against his friends and family, and many would distance themselves from him, scared of what he would do in a rage. However, when Chris would inevitably settle down or stop taking steroids for a while, he would return to his gracious self, the one that wouldn't harm a hair on his family's head. But unfortunately, that wouldn't last. On November 22, 1985, Chris made his professional debut. He was paired with the remarkable Rick Patterson against Butch Moffitt and Mike Hammer. Benoit and Patterson won the match after Benoit pinned Moffitt with a sunset flip to great acclaim. As he had before, he stood out against his peers, and it was obvious to those around him that he would go far. And while his drive and incredible work ethic was notable to those around him, it did not help him make friends in the business. He was solely focused on working out, learning new stunts, and improving upon whatever was asked of him, and would refuse to socialize with others unless he felt it ultimately necessary. 3 years later, he would go on to win his first title as Stampede British Commonwealth Mid-Heavyweight Champion. He would go on to win 4 international tag team titles and 3 more British Commonwealth titles between 1985 and 1989, before joining the New Japan Pro Wrestling circuit. During that time, Chris would go on to marry his first wife, Martina. Martina and Chris would keep their relationship relatively private, and many sources would give conflicting information as to how they met, got married, and started a family. But according to Martina herself, their relationship was relatively loving. She described Chris as one of the most caring people she had ever met, and said that he had a secret sensitivity about him that he hid from the world. He wanted to take care of her and the family, and he was dedicated to being the main provider for them, which only furthered his professional drive. After the pair got married, they went on to have 2 children, David and Megan, and Chris, wanting to give them the life he felt they deserved, would increase his steroid use, exercise more intensely, and therefore take more damage in the ring. But instead of giving his family a happier life, this had the unintended consequence of breaking down his marriage. Though Martina was adamant that Chris had never laid a hand on her or their children, and that he was a wonderful husband and father, she did admit that when he would use steroids, he would become a different person. He would become overly paranoid and accusatory, and in one instance, threw a ceramic plate at her during a fight. Luckily, she was able to dodge the projectile, but at that point, she knew that she had to leave him, both for her safety and the safety of the kids. In 1997, the two would divorce. But while his marriage was disintegrating, Chris's career was on its way up. In 1989, Chris would make his New Japan Pro Wrestling debut as the Pegasus Kid, donning a mask in the ring. 4 years later, he would win his first major championship in Japan, and cemented himself as one of the top pro wrestlers in the nation. He likewise renamed his in-ring character to Wild Pegasus. At the same time, he traveled outside of Japan to take part in the World Championship. He continued to win titles and participate in championship matches across Japan until 1994, when he began working with Extreme Championship Wrestling in between tours. At this time, Chris garnered the name The Crippler, given his intense fighting style that became his signature. However, this name would become morbidly accurate when, in a fight, Chris would break his competitor's neck. The injury was entirely accidental, as Chris had thrown his opponent, Sabu, with the direct intention that he would take a face-first pancake bump. However, Sabu attempted to turn mid-air so he could land on his back instead. He was unable to achieve a full rotation before meeting the ground, and would land directly on his neck, breaking it in the fall.
Welcome to Extreme Warfare Volume 1. This is Joey Styles. And as you can see, Crippler Chris Benoit. It's the ringing. Does he look ready for action? Benoit, one of the finest wrestlers in the world. Many think he is the finest wrestler in the sport today. Extensive experience in Japan, Mexico, as well as here in the U.S. In fact, there's Extreme Championship Wrestling that first showcased Crippler Chris Benoit here in the United States. And here comes Sabu. They're not going to wait for the bell. Sabu missed the leg sweep. The Crippler all over Sabu. Irish whipping. Perfectly placed knee to the midsection. Sabu dropped across the top rope. Benoit feeling very confident early on in this matchup. Sabu's manager, Paulie dangerously at ringside, along with his handler, 911. Hopefully. Oh my God! Did you see him land on his head? I think he broke his neck. Paulie dangerously and 911 attending to Sabu. He's not getting up. Referee John Finnegan there as well. Oh my God. I think he broke his neck. You guys in the... Does anyone know? Sabu is down, and he's hurt.
This event shook Chris to his core. He had always been fine with injuring his opponents and getting injured himself, as he believed a few hits never truly hurt anyone. A concussion, a broken bone, all of that was fair game when you were in the ring. But breaking someone's neck came with a wide range of repercussions that had never occurred to him. When it was relayed to him that his opponent's neck had in fact been broken, it was possible that he would be paralyzed as a result. Chris broke down, sobbing in the locker room with guilt. Again, it had never occurred to Chris that any of his actions against others or against himself would have lifelong repercussions, and the idea that it would was shocking. Sabu would go on to talk about Chris in multiple interviews and discuss his feelings on the matter.
And the Chris Benoit incident where you got your neck broken, could you discuss that?
That was an accident, and I never held him responsible, but I didn't like him. I didn't like him before that, but I didn't really like him that much after that. But not like what I thought. I can't say I knew what he was going to do with his family, and I dislike him for that. That's for sure.
Yeah, what was the reason you disliked him before that?
I was with him in Japan, and we were never friendly together. He wasn't friendly, you know.
I see.
If you didn't wrestle him, he didn't even say hello to you, you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And what was he like in the ring? Obviously...
It was all business, you know.
Yeah.
He took it too serious.
And I heard you say that he actually went to the hospital that night to check on you again.
Yeah, he did. Like a sissy.
Surprisingly, Chris continued to go by the moniker The Crippler and would be haunted by the experience for the remainder of his life. Sabu, for his part, would make a full recovery. After his divorce from Martina, Chris would commit himself even further to wrestling, and it was there that he met his next wife, Nancy. Nancy was the wife and wrestling valet of fellow wrestler Kevin Sullivan, and sometimes wrestled for the WCW under the name Woman. Nancy was incredibly business savvy and driven, and often made a lot of the behind-the-scenes business decisions for her and her husband, leading to her having a large part in the roles that they would play. When Chris was scouted by Ric Flair to become a part of the Four Horsemen, a decision that would move him up in ranks, his first role was to be placed in a feud with Sullivan. The basis for the feud was simple. Nancy and Chris were made to look like they had an affair behind the scenes, and Kevin would fight for Nancy's honor. The two men would battle it out for her hand, but in the end, Nancy would stay with her husband, or at least that's what was supposed to happen. Shockingly, when Chris and Nancy spent time together pretending to go on dates and getting footage to be used in the lead up to the fights, the pair would start an affair. According to those who knew Nancy, she was shocked and moved by Chris's sensitive side and would go out of his way to do things for her, and he was exceptionally kind, even when he didn't need to be. When they would be left alone, he would then open up to her about his life and motivations and why he loved wrestling so much, and Nancy was deeply moved. She would go on to tell her friends that she had something beautiful and passionate with Chris, and that she couldn't see her life without him. When the affair became real, Nancy swiftly left her husband and filed for divorce, wanting to instead be with Chris as much as possible. For Kevin, this was heartbreaking. He had played along with the charade, thinking that it was an act like any other, but he had never expected his wife to leave him. Animosity grew between Chris and Kevin openly blamed Chris for the disintegration of his marriage. However, Chris would later state that Kevin, as much as he hated him, was never unfair to him in the ring, and never went too far in their fights, even though no one would blame him if he did. He didn't let his anger get in the way of his professionalism, and Chris deeply respected that. Nancy's life is usually overlooked when people talk about Chris and what happened, but she was an incredibly interesting person. Nancy was born Nancy Toffaloni on May 17, 1964, and she was a Spitfire. Nancy was a go-getter and the type of woman who got whatever she wanted when she set her mind to it. If you told her no, she would find a way to turn that into a yes, usually without you realizing it. From a very young age, people knew she was going to make something of herself. It just depended on what she decided to do. She dropped out of high school to marry her first husband, Jim Doss. Jim was interested in professional wrestling, and it was through him that she would become involved in the sport, and she immediately became enamored with it. Through her appearance, she was able to gain a considerable amount of attention when she would attend events, and it was through that she would end up modeling for multiple wrestling magazines. These magazine shoots would result in her meeting up with multiple higher-ups in the wrestling world, and getting her a plethora of opportunities. But Nancy was more than a pretty face. She would network with these powerful men and women and manage them, making herself of use to them as much as possible. She made herself an asset to those who were around her, and was up for any role they could give her, leading to them giving her more and more. She was passionate about wrestling, but she was also incredibly business savvy, and it was no wonder why her and Chris would fall in love. After marrying Chris, Nancy would leave the world of wrestling. She no longer wanted to be a part of the wrestling world in front of the camera, citing a lot of the backlash her relationship with Chris caused. And instead, she wanted to focus on starting a family with him, and would help manage Chris's career from their shared home in Atlanta. The same year they married, Chris and Nancy would welcome their only child, Daniel Christopher Benoit. Daniel was Chris's third child, but Nancy's first, and from the moment he was born, it was obvious that he had some developmental delays. There has been widespread speculation as to what was wrong with Daniel, a lot of which feels incredibly morbid and disrespectful to Daniel's short life. Some articles posting that he suffered from a rare medical condition called Fragile X syndrome, stemming from Chris's prolific steroid use. Other sources claim that he was dealing with autism, and still more speculate and theorize what was really behind the child's delays. Regardless of what exactly Daniel was dealing with, he required supplementary care. However, because Chris was always on the road, that care fell sorely onto Nancy's shoulders. This division of care would cause a rift in the marriage, with Nancy wanting to support Chris's passions but also feeling it necessary. In numerous fights that they would have, she would ask him to take time off, stop traveling as much, or simply just take days off of training to spend time with Daniel, but Chris would reject her offer outright, like what had happened in his first marriage. Chris was dedicated to providing for his family, even if it meant that his family wasn't together. These disagreements would escalate, especially if they occurred while Chris was using steroids, as he would often lash out aggressively due to roid rage and his own paranoia. In one instance, he told Nancy that she was trying to tank his career, and he berated her. These arguments would escalate until finally, in 2003, Nancy would file for divorce and file a restraining order against Chris, citing cruel and inhumane treatment. According to the court documents and those close to Nancy at the time, she still loved Chris, but this continued abuse of steroids caused him to become violent towards her and Daniel, and she was determined to protect her son. Chris's own paranoia and delusions caused by the steroids would eventually subside, but when he was confronted with what he had done, Chris apologized to Nancy. He told her he would stop taking steroids in the home, and he would make more of an effort to be at home with Daniel, and he begged her for another chance. It was everything that Nancy wanted to hear, and it was everything she had been begging him for. Still in love and wanting to raise her son with his father, she took Chris back, dropping the divorce and restraining order. Before we continue, it's important to note that it's exceedingly common in abusive relationships, especially when there is a child involved, that the abused party will try to leave and end up going back to their partner. That, of course, does not exempt their partner for the blame of the abuse. In some reporting, many have been incredibly harsh towards Nancy's decisions, as they feel as if she should have left when she had the chance. However, things are never that clear-cut, and if you haven't been in the same situation, it's hard to understand the pull an abuser can have on a person. Please remember to take that into consideration, especially if you watch and listen to true crime-related content. A simple, "she should have just left him," is much easier said than done. After Nancy and Chris reconciled, their marriage was said to be near perfect by those who were around them. Chris would still abuse steroids, but according to Nancy, he was using them much less, and often would only use them when he was on the road touring. He still didn't spend as much time with Daniel, despite what he had promised her, but she was appreciative that he was at least making an effort. His storylines in the ring were beginning to wind down, with many fights being against younger wrestlers, with him predetermined to lose. Still, he continued to fight on, dedicated to being the kind of person he hoped kids would look up to. But everything changed on November 13th, 2005. Eddie Guerrero was a longtime friend of Chris and fellow wrestler. The two had met in the ring and became close friends after Chris had kicked Eddie in the head and knocked him out cold. They were exceptionally close, and Chris considered Eddie to be his closest friend, which is why he was devastated to find that on November 13th, 2005, Guerrero was found unconscious in his hotel room by his nephew, Chavo, who was also a professional wrestler. The pair were traveling together, and when he found his uncle, he was passed out in the bathroom, toothbrush in hand, barely clinging to life. Unfortunately, by the time the paramedics would arrive, Eddie would be pronounced dead. It was later revealed that he had died as a result of acute heart failure due to an underlying atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, which was likely caused by steroid use. For Chris, this death was devastating. Eddie had been his companion for years, and after having his friend's life ripped out from under him with no warning signs was incredibly heartbreaking. After he was pronounced dead, Raw and SmackDown both aired tributes to Eddie's life, and in both tributes, Chris would break down.
Eddie Guerrero is my best friend, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that he knew that would be able to say the same thing about him. He was such a beautiful person, such a kind-hearted person. I couldn't find the words. Words couldn't describe what kind of a human being Eddie truly was. I've known Eddie for just about 15 years and spent a good portion of them 15 years with him on the road. We've laughed together, cried together, fought each other. We've been up and down each and every mountain, each and every highway. And Eddie always led by example. He was the one friend that I had that I could go to and pour my heart out to if I was going through something, if I had a personal issue or a personal problem. He was the one guy that I could call and talk to and know that he would understand and he would talk me out of it, because of all the experiences that he'd been through. I believe in leading by example, and Eddie always led by example through his life, through the obstacles that he went through and conquered and became a better person. And he'd often use that as an example. A lot of times we'd travel on the road together. So on the road, it's so chaotic and so, from the time we got up in the morning, we'd be 2 hours behind schedule. But it's funny because we'd pull up to a gym and we'd find ourselves sitting outside the gym for up to an hour and a half, just talking. We'd just sit there, sit in the car, talking about life, talking about the past, present, future. We just talk about life. Eddie was that kind of friend to me. And not only then, but after the shows, it'd be 1 a.m, and we'd be sat in the car till 3 a.m, talking about life, talking about things and issues and problems and everything. We talked about everything, and we never left each other without telling each other that we loved each other. And I truly can say that I love Eddie Guerrero. He's a man that I can say I love, and I love his family, and my heart and my thoughts and my prayers go out to his wife Vicky, Shaw, Cheryl, and Kaylee. I can't imagine the sorrow that they're going through right now and the emotions that they're feeling. But I want them to know that my prayers and my thoughts are with them. And Eddie, I know that you're in a better place, and I know that you're looking down on me right now. And I want you to know that I love you. I miss you. Eddie, you made such a great impression on my life, and I want to thank you for everything you've ever given me. And I want to thank you from my heart and tell you that I love you and I'll never forget you. And I will see each other again. I love you, Eddie.
Many were shocked at Chris's emotional displays. Usually, the men in professional wrestling take extraordinary care to appear untouchable and tough, but his raw vulnerability, both in the ring and in his dedication to Eddie, touched many. It was only later that people would begin to see his display as a potential warning sign. In the CNN documentary Death Grip, Inside Pro Wrestling, Chris's emotional state, when it came to his friend's passing, would once again be put on display when his diary entries from the time would be publicized.
This is an open letter to Eddie on November 24th, 2005.
Mike Benoit is reading the diary his son wrote over an 11-day period in 2005. The diary consists of rambling letters to his best friend, a wrestler named Eddie Guerrero. The first entry, the first note to Eddie, was written on November 23rd, 10 days after his 38-year-old friend dropped dead of a heart attack.
Oh, Eddie, I forgot to tell you about my dream last night. I dreamt that both my parents were perished.
Mike Benoit believes it's the diary of his son going mad.
And Nancy and I were trying to get to her parents in Daytona to save them because we felt that they were being taken next. And these people after them were very powerful people, high-ranking people. When we got to Daytona, it was too late. Her parents were gone too, perished. We just didn't understand this was going on at that time in Chris's life.
Chris's mind was unraveling. The continued steroid use alongside painkillers and consistent head injuries was causing his grip on reality to slowly loosen. According to those around him at the time, he was a man of few words and seemed generally fine, although they would admit that he did seem a bit slower. His diary would go on to showcase his losing his grasp on the world, thinking that people were going to try and take his son away from him, and his fears about his own mortality. According to friends of Nancy, she began to worry about his mental well-being. There were times where he would refuse to let her or Daniel go out of the house, worried that something would happen to them. He would drive around for hours, trying to make sure people weren't trying to follow him home, and at one point had purposely driven on the wrong side of the road to make sure he was safe. He was consistently on edge, but managed to keep his feelings somewhat under wraps. After Eddie's passing, more and more people were openly discussing the death rate of relatively young wrestlers, and the idea that steroid use was an underlying factor began to make Chris more paranoid. He had been using drugs for over a decade and knew that they could make him violent, but the idea that there were long-standing effects had not occurred to him, according to his diary. Chris began to spiral into a deep depression. He was still reeling from Eddie's death, over a year later, and his grasp on what was real and what wasn't was loosening. Not only that, but he was beginning to suffer the side effects from the sheer amount of damage he had done to his head over his career. Repeated concussions, flying headbutts, and purposely taking metal chairs to the head had begun to catch up with him, and he would have rampant bouts of confusion, loss of memory, and paranoia. Though many didn't realize it at the time, Chris was battling the final stages of CTE, and his brain scans would show that at the age of 40, his mind was roughly the same as a man twice his age, suffering from the late stages of dementia. He had lost a certain amount of brain function, which caused his depression to be more severe, and his paranoia to run rampant. Despite his rapidly declining mental and physical health, those around Chris didn't notice anything was wrong with the prized fighter, and on June 25, 2007, they would be shocked at what he would go on to do. What happened June 22, 2007 will always be showered in mystery. No one could say for certain what caused Chris to decide to murder his wife. What we do know is that Nancy had taken therapeutic amounts of Xanax, hydrocodone, and hydromorphone, which all had been properly prescribed to her. At 9:52 p.m., a phone from the Benoit home made a call to 411, and they were given the number for the police non-emergency line. However, who called and why they needed the number is unknown. Shortly thereafter, 2 more calls were made, this time to their neighbor, Holly McFay's cell phone. Unfortunately, she was unable to answer the phone and no message was left, so we cannot say for certain who called or why. It has been speculated that Nancy was calling both 411 and Holly because something was wrong with Chris, something that she felt wasn't serious enough to warrant a call to the police, but was unsafe for Daniel to be around, so she might have been attempting to find a safe place for her son while she took care of Chris. However, we cannot know for sure, as after these phone calls were placed, Nancy would be killed by Chris. According to the autopsy, Nancy had suffered a blow to the head before pinning his knee into her back and wrapping a TV cable around her neck, drawing it tight until she stopped breathing. He then left her on their shared bed, putting a Bible by her body, and went to sleep. The next day, he spent time with Daniel before drugging him with Xanax. Once Daniel was passed out, he then slowly suffocated his son, once again leaving a Bible next to him. At that point, he began to Google how to break his own neck quickly, and it was clear he wanted to die in a similar way to what he had accidentally done earlier in his career, and settled on hanging himself in his favorite room in the house, the gym. There are varying reports on whether he was able to break his own neck, but shortly after killing both his wife and son, he hung himself. But it would be a while before anyone would find the bodies. On Saturday, June 23rd, Chavo Guerrero, Eddie Guerrero's nephew and fellow wrestler, received a text from Chris saying that he had missed his plane and wouldn't be able to meet up before their match that night in Belmont, Texas. He claimed that Nancy and Daniel, who at that point had already been killed, were experiencing an extreme bout of food poisoning, and he was nursing them back to health. Given Chris's dedication to wrestling and his impeccable record, no thought was given to if he was telling the truth or not, and Chavo understood. After talking to Chris on the phone, Chris stated that he loved him with a certain amount of emphasis that felt unnatural to Guerrero, and hung up. Shortly after the call, Benoit was seen by his neighbor, Holly, and stated once more that Nancy and Daniel were extremely sick inside, and he was taking care of them. No one else heard from Benoit until 3:53 a.m. Sunday, when he sent out a blast of text messages to Chavo Guerrero. My physical address is 130 Green Meadow Lane, Fayetteville, Georgia, 30215. The first message read. 2 minutes later, he sent another text saying, "The dogs are in an enclosed pool area, garage side door is open." Chris also utilized Nancy's phone and sent the same texts to multiple different contacts, hoping that someone would understand. But given the time that they were sent, many just thought it was an accidental message. It would be another day before red flags were raised and the WWE would call for a welfare check to be done at the home.
Hi, I just spoke to one of the other officers there. My name is Dennis Fagan. I'm a retired detective in New York City. I run the security for World Wrestling, and one of our wrestlers that lives down there is missing, and he told me just to say we need a welfare check done.
Okay, what's the address?
130 Green Meadow Lane. The zip code is 30215.
All right, Dennis, what's your last name?
Fagan, Fagan.
And what's his name?
Chris Benoit. It's spelled Benoit.
Okay, and he's a wrestler?
Yes, what happened, he's a very religious gentleman, and yesterday he was supposed to show up at a pay-per-view and never got on the plane, never showed up. They've tried to reach his wife, Nancy. She doesn't answer. They tried to call his house. It's out of character for him. So at 3 o'clock this morning, there was a message left for one of the other wrestlers, and basically it says, the dogs are in the backyard, the back door is open, goodbye. And that was it.
Dogs in the yard?
Yes, and the back door is open. He didn't say anything else, and that was it.
Door.
That message was left at 3 o'clock this morning for another wrestler.
Okay, and that's 130 Green Meadow Lane.
Yes.
Okay, and what's the phone number for you?
My cell is 646-739-1992.
Okay, what does he look like?
Chris is about 6'1", very muscular, very stocky, has a very wide neck, looks like a wrestler.
Okay. White male, black male?
Yes, male white.
White male. Okay.
He's got short black hair.
Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and send somebody out there to check on him. If you want to call us back in like 45 minutes or so. If they number I should call back? Yeah, it's 770-461-4357.
4357?
Yeah, and if he's there, we'll tell him to give you a call. But if you want to call back and check to see if we, if anybody was there or anything, just call us back in about 30, 45 minutes.
Anybody in particular, or just tell them?
Anybody can talk to you. It doesn't matter.
Great.
They're going to ask you for the address again, but that's about it. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Hi, you reached Dennis Fagan. Leave your name and number, and I will get right back to you. Thank you.
When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press pound for more options.
Mr. Fagan, this is the Fayette County Sheriff's Dispatch. I do have a couple of deputies out at Mr. Benoit's residence, but the gate is locked, and there are two pretty aggressive canines, or aggressive German Shepherds out there that are, our deputies are unable to get in. If you happen to have a gate code or anything for him, if you could give me a call back at 770-461-4357, 770-461-4357. Thank you very much. Mr. Fagan.
Yes.
Hey, this is with Sheriff's Department Dispatch.
Yes, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good. Did you get my message, or did you just?
No. I just called the number back.
Okay, very good. I do have a couple of deputies out at Mr. Benoit's house.
Okay.
But the gate is locked, and they're unable to get inside.
The gate is locked.
Yeah, you wouldn't happen to have a code for that, would you?
No, I don't. And the message that we got, like I say, left a message at 3 o'clock in the morning for another wrestler.
Right.
The gate's open, the dogs are in the backyard by the pool, and the back door's open.
Huh.
That was it.
Right. Yeah, because apparently
that's why they're worried about him, because Chris is very, going against Chris, he's very religious.
Right.
It's unlike him. He didn't show up for a pay-per-view.
Yeah.
He never made it to the plane. They can't reach his wife. So now nobody's answering the home phone. Nobody's answering the cell phone.
Yeah, and I think as far as, I'm not sure how far away from the road the house is, so I'm not sure if they're able to tell if anybody's there.
Oh,
but
okay.
like I said, the gate. It's got a call box. Apparently nobody's answering that. Okay. And then the dogs are actually out in the front, so, and they're
all right, okay.
Yeah, and they're pretty. According to my deputy, they're pretty aggressive as well. So.
Okay.
But they're not friendly, as she put it.
Oh,
but,
okay.
So yeah, you don't happen to know anybody that would know that gate code offhand, would it?
You know what? I'm going to try and make some phone calls. Maybe maybe he did leave it for somebody, and I will get back to you.
Okay, and probably what I'll do is just have I'll have my guys go ahead and leave from where they are. And as soon as you find that information out, then just give us a call back. We'll send somebody back down there.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Mr. Fagan?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you able to get a gate code or anything like that?
No. But what happened was they just called back. They said that there's only one neighbor to the left right there who's very friendly with them.
Okay.
They don't know if they might have the gate code, but now they're saying that there was two text messages, and they were both at like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. One from his phone and one from his wife Nancy's phone.
Okay.
And they went to the same wrestler who doesn't even live anywhere near them.
Right.
And basically said, "This is the house number. The dogs are in the backyard. The patio door's unlocked," and that was it. So that's what they're worried about. And it's unlike, like I said, it's out of character for Chris to do anything like this.
Right.
He's missed 2 shows, one on Saturday and pay-per-view on Sunday. And so they're saying the only thing they know is that one of the wrestlers called back and said he's always talking about his neighbor next door to the left, who is, I guess, good friends with him.
Right.
But I told them about the dogs, and they were saying, they don't know. The gentleman I'm dealing with at World Wrestling is a retired judge from up here in New York.
Okay.
Nobody really, has a gate code, they're saying, but the thing is, I don't know what you guys would do is if you thought something was wrong in the house,
right.
You'd have to like taser the dogs to put them to sleep.
Basically, we just need somebody to contain them. I think that would be the main thing.
Right.
Now, that neighbor that's friendly with him, do you think they would be able possibly to contain those dogs?
That's what the other this Chavro is the name of the other wrestler. That's what he's saying. He's saying that Chris is always saying how friendly he is with his next door neighbor, but it's to the house to the left.
House to the left.
Yes, and
we don't know
like
the name.
They all seem to be very worried because they get these messages at 3:30 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And they said when they spoke to him the other day, he seemed depressed and he said something about food poisoning. But then like I said, they get the same messages. Nobody's answering the cell phones. Nobody's answering the house phones.
Right. That's definitely suspicious. Okay. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and have a deputy swing down and see if they can make contact with the neighbors.
Okay.
and see where we can go from there.
Okay, thank you. You'll let me know. Thank you, sir.
Yes, no problem.
Bye.
Bye.
At which point, the bodies of Daniel, Nancy, and Chris were found. There's a number of conspiracy theories about what had occurred, with some people posting that the WWE had Chris and the family killed because of an edit made to his Wikipedia page, while others think it was a drug-related crime. But we won't be getting into the weeds of those theories. As Nancy's family had stated, they are disrespectful to her memory. Though many speculate why Chris felt the need to take the lives of his entire family that night, we will never truly know. There was no direct note that was left at the scene. However, Chris's father would state that his ex-wife, Martina, found what appeared to be a suicide note in a Bible that they had sent to her after his passing, which stated that he was preparing to leave the earth. The rest of its contents have not been shared publicly. Chris spent years damaging his body for sport, taking blows to the head purposely, and taking drugs to give himself the body that was deemed desirable for his chosen profession. Both over use of steroids, painkillers, and repeated concussions have been linked with paranoia, suicidal ideation, and aggression. And it's not ridiculous to link those things with these murders. Nancy and Daniel had so much life left to live. They loved Chris. They loved their lives together, and we will never truly know what happened that night. Chris's legacy as one of the top fighters has forever been tarnished, and we will never truly know why, but knowing the answer would never make it make sense. If you like this video, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe. If you would like to support our content, as YouTube has demonetized most of our videos, consider checking out our Patreon, linked below. And if there is a case you would like to see us cover, feel free to leave it in a comment down below or send us an email at dreading.official@gmail.com. Thank you so much for watching this episode, and stay safe.